The loading bay of Caraxes mining colony reeked of lubricant and desperation. Sergeant Kieran Thorne's boots left bloody prints on the metal floor, not his blood. The mercenary outpost had fallen in less than an hour, their security no match for a man who'd spent 15 years in Alliance Special Operations before going private. "Clear the east corridor," he ordered into his comm as he pulled his particle blade from a mercenary's chest. "I want their data cores intact." The job was simple. Eliminate the Helix Brigade mercenaries who'd seized this moon, retrieve mining rights documentation for his corporate client. Clean, profitable work. Until his scanner picked up life signs beneath the facility's main level. "Command, I'm detecting an unauthorized sublevel. Moving to investigate." The hidden entrance revealed itself behind a maintenance panel, a crude lift shaft descending into darkness. As Thorne dropped into the gloom, his night vision implant adjusted, revealing a makeshift detention block. The stench of unwashed bodies and despair hit him like a physical blow. Well, shit, this wasn't in the contract. 20 cells lined the walls, most containing huddled forms. The prisoners were predominantly Vasari. Distinctive blue-tinged skin stretched over willowy frames, large iridescent eyes adapted for their homeworld's dim light. A pacifist species known for their bioengineering brilliance, not their combat prowess. "Please," a voice whispered from the nearest cell. "Are they gone?" Thorne approached, rifle at the ready. A female Vasari sat against the wall, knees drawn to her chest. Tribal markings spiraled across her exposed arms, now interrupted by burn scars and crude surgical sutures. Her long hair had been roughly shorn, but her eyes, the same deep indigo as the nebula beyond Caraxes, remained defiant. "The Helix Brigade's been neutralized," Thorne confirmed, deactivating the cell barrier. "I'm Sergeant Thorne, independent contractor." "Nadia," she replied, her melodic accent turning the word into something almost beautiful. "Biological researcher." "Before." Thorne offered his hand. She ignored it, rising on her own despite obvious pain. Standing, she barely reached his shoulder, yet carried herself with surprising dignity. "Your people are pacifists. What are you doing in a mercenary mining operation?" "Extraction," she said, gesturing to surgical scars on her arms. "Vasari produce natural compounds valuable in pharmaceutical synthesis. They found our research vessel, brought us here, harvested from us." Thorne's stomach turned. "I'll arrange evacuation for your people. The Alliance has a medical frigate at—" "No." Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with unexpected strength. "Not all mercenaries are here. Their commander, Varric, is off-world with his elite guard. They'll return in days. If we leave, they'll just find others." Thorne frowned. "That's not my problem. My contract. I can make it worth your effort." Her eyes locked with his, something dangerous flickering in their depths. "I'll give you everything I have. I don't need payment from prisoners." Nadia stepped closer, the thin prison garment doing little to hide her slender form. "Not money. Me. My knowledge of their operations. My body, if you desire it. My loyalty." Her voice hardened. "But first, avenge what they did to us. Hunt them all." Thorne had seen desperation before, but this was different. Calculated, resolute. This wasn't a plea for rescue. It was a business proposition born of rage. "You don't know what you're asking," he said quietly. "I do." She touched one of her scars. "They spent 6 months teaching me exactly what vengeance means. Now I want to return the lesson." Against his better judgment, Thorne felt something stir within him, not desire, but recognition. He'd seen that same hollow determination in his own eyes after the Teresian massacre. "There are better ways to heal, Nadia. Healing comes later, if ever." She extended her hand. "Do we have an arrangement, Sergeant Thorne?" He should refuse, should call an extraction and move on. Instead, he found himself taking her hand, her skin cool against his calloused palm. "I don't want what you're offering." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You will." After we've finished, you'll want something to wash away the blood. Their secondary base is here. Nadia's slender finger traced the holographic map hovering between them. 3 weeks had passed since their escape from Caraxes, and the cramped confines of Thorn's ship, the Perdition, had become their war room. The facility processes what they harvest from captives before shipping to black market buyers. Thorn studied her face in the blue glow of the projection. The hollows in her cheeks had begun to fill, though nightmares still tore her from sleep most nights. He'd hear her pacing the narrow corridor outside his quarters, murmuring in her native tongue. "Security protocols?" he asked, focusing on the task. "Minimal. They rely on secrecy, not strength." She brushed a strand of growing hair behind her ear. "The lab technicians aren't fighters. They're still complicit." His voice hardened. "Everyone who profited deserves what's coming." Nadia's eyes met his. "Yes, they do." The first facility had fallen 3 days ago, a distribution center on Helia Station. Thorn had moved through it like a ghost, leaving only corpses. Nadia had waited on the ship, but insisted on reviewing the footage afterward, watching with unsettling calmness as her tormentors fell. "You don't need to see this," he'd told her. "I need to know it's real," she'd replied. Now she stood closer than necessary, her shoulder brushing his arm as she manipulated the hologram. The proximity wasn't accidental. Each day she found new reasons to touch him, passing him tools, reaching across him for datapads, testing boundaries, perhaps, or simply relearning that touch could exist without pain. "We'll move at station midnight," Thorn decided. "I want you monitoring vital signs from the ship, if I flatline." "You won't." Her hand rested briefly on his forearm. "But I've programmed emergency protocols regardless." That evening, as Thorn prepared his weapons, Nadia appeared in his doorway wearing one of his shirts, the fabric hanging loosely on her frame. "Teach me," she said simply, gesturing toward his disassembled pulse rifle. He hesitated. "Your people abhor violence. My people aren't here." She sat beside him on the narrow bunk. "I watched them die maintaining those principles. Now I'm the only one left to remember, or to choose differently." Thorn placed a pistol in her hands, guiding her fingers to the proper positions. She learned quickly, her natural dexterity making up for lack of experience. When her hands trembled, he steadied them with his own. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Your contract ended with Caraxes." The question caught him off guard. Some things can't be ignored. That's not an answer. Thorn set down the weapon. 5 years ago, I failed to protect civilians during a corporate raid. I followed orders, stayed with my unit instead of helping. 67 people died. He met her gaze. "Since then, I choose differently when I can." Nadia's expression softened. She leaned forward, her lips brushing his cheek. Not seduction, but something more terrifying. Gratitude. "We leave in 4 hours, he said gruffly, pulling away. "Get some rest." But that night, as the Perdition cut silently through deep space, Thorn found himself standing outside her quarters. The door slid open before he could retreat. "I heard you," Nadia said softly. In the dim light, her scars seemed to silver her skin like constellations. "More nightmares." "Planning," he lied. She smiled faintly. "Then plan here." She moved aside, inviting him into the small room she gradually filled with small touches, sketches of her homeworld, a makeshift altar with salvaged crystals. "I find I sleep better when not alone." That night, they simply lay side by side, not touching save for her hand finding his in darkness. It felt more intimate than any seduction could have been. 2 broken people granting each other momentary peace before the next slaughter began. The following day, 16 more of the mercenary network died by Thorn's hand. The pattern continued for weeks, tracking, killing, moving on. With each successful mission, Nadia grew stronger, more determined. And each night, the space between them on her bunk grew smaller, though neither acknowledged the shifting gravity between them. They were hunting monsters. There was no room for anything else. Not yet. Commander Varick's compound sprawled across the surface of a private asteroid, its defense systems formidable enough to repel small military vessels. After 2 months of methodical elimination, only the core of the mercenary operation remained, 20 elite guards and Varick himself. This approach is suicide, Nadia argued, her voice steady despite the fear Thorne saw in her eyes. They stood in the Perdition's airlock, her hands checking the seals on his tactical armor. The orbital cannons will destroy the ship before you reach the surface. That's why I'm not using the ship. Thorne secured the last of his weapons. The maintenance drones will mask my heat signature during descent. Nadia's fingers stilled on his chest plate. You planned this knowing that object. I planned this knowing it's the only way. He caught her hand. This ends today, one way or another. And then what? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Before he could answer, she pulled him down, pressing her lips against his with unexpected fierceness. Unlike their growing physical closeness, the nights spent in shared warmth. This was deliberate, a claim being staked. Return to me, she whispered against his mouth. Whatever happens after, just return. The descent to Varick's compound was textbook until the final approach. An alert sensor triggered automated defenses, forcing Thorne to abandon his controlled landing for a combat drop. His shoulder dislocated on impact, pain lancing through him as he rolled behind cover. Position compromised, he hissed into his comm. Going loud. What followed was chaos, a running firefight through the compound's outer perimeter. Thorne moved with cold efficiency, but the guards were well trained. A plasma round grazed his thigh. Another caught his side. By the time he reached the central structure, his medical system was pumping stimulants to counteract blood loss. Varick awaited in his command center, a burly human with cybernetic enhancements gleaming along his jaw and arms. Recognition dawned in his eyes. The famous Sergeant Thorne, he sneered. Quite the reputation you've built. Half my operation decimated for what? Some alien lab rats. Just one, Thorne replied, raising his weapon. The fight was brutal and swift. Varick's augmentations gave him inhuman strength, but Thorne had something colder driving him. When it ended, Thorne stood victorious, though barely upright, blood pooling beneath him as he activated the compound's communication array. It's done, he transmitted to the Perdition, sending coordinates for extraction. The response wasn't Nadia's voice, but proximity alarms. A small vessel had launched from the Perdition, heading directly for the compound. She arrived as Thorne was losing consciousness, her slender frame somehow supporting his as she dragged him toward Varick's personal shuttle. Behind them, the charges they'd prepared remotely began detonating throughout the facility. You weren't supposed to come, he mumbled as she administered emergency medical compounds. You weren't supposed to die, she countered, her hand steady despite the carnage surrounding them. Where once she'd flinched at violence, now she moved through it with terrible grace. During the journey back to the Perdition, drifting in and out of consciousness, Thorne watched Nadia pilot with newfound confidence. What had he done to her? Saved her, or merely reshaped her trauma into something equally destructive? Recovery took 3 weeks in a medical facility on Terminus Station, Nadia rarely leaving his side. The night before his discharge, she came to him wearing a new dress of Vazari design, her growing hair adorned with traditional beads. I fulfilled my part of our arrangement, she said softly, standing before him. Now I fulfill my promise. She reached for the closures of her dress, but Thorne caught her wrists. Don't, he said hoarsely. Pain flashed across her features. You find me undesirable. I find you unbearably desirable, he corrected. But not like this. Not as payment. Her hands fell to her sides. Then what do you want from me? The question contained all the broken pieces between them. Savior and victim, weapon and wielder, 2 damaged souls who'd found purpose in destruction. Time, he finally answered. Time to discover who we are when vengeance isn't driving us. That night she lay beside him, her head on his chest, and for the first time since they'd met, both slept without nightmares. Alaron Station hung in the twilight zone of a binary star system, its transparent dome capturing the perpetual sunset. For centuries, it had served as neutral territory for species seeking rehabilitation after conflict. Now it sheltered two more wounded souls. "Your form is improving," Thorne observed as Nadia completed the meditation sequence. They stood in the station's arboretum, surrounded by flora from dozens of worlds. After a month on Alaron, color had returned to her skin, the iridescent blue undertones catching light as she moved. "The physical therapist says you're improving too," she countered, eyeing the cane he still used. "Though you're still too stubborn to admit it hurts." Their quarters connected through a shared living space, separate bedrooms a deliberate choice despite the growing tension between them. Some nights, Nadia still appeared at his door, seeking comfort from nightmares. Other nights, Thorne was the one who couldn't face the darkness alone. "I received a message from Esper Corporation," Thorne said as they walked the garden paths. "They're offering a security consultant position. Planet-side, permanent location." Nadia studied a flowering vine, not meeting his eyes. "You've never stayed in one place. I've never had reason to consider it." The unspoken question hung between them. What were they to each other now? The vengeance that bound them had been sated. The transaction she'd offered was rejected. What remained was undefined, moments of surprising laughter, silent understanding across rooms, hands finding each other in darkness. That evening, they attended a cultural exhibition featuring Vasari art. Watching Nadia explain traditional symbology to fascinated humans, Thorne realized how rarely he'd seen her simply enjoy herself. She caught him watching and smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Later, returning to their quarters, an uncomfortable silence fell between them. "I should tell you," Nadia finally said. "The station administrator helped me contact the Vasari diaspora. There's a settlement on Lyria Prime. They've invited me to join them." Something cold settled in Thorne's chest. "When would you leave?" "I haven't decided if I'm going." She moved closer, her hand finding his. "What would you have me do, Kieran?" It was the first time she'd used his given name. The intimacy of it struck him harder than any physical touch. "I have you choose what brings you peace," he answered honestly. That night, it was Nadia who stood outside his door, but not seeking refuge from nightmares. When it opened, she stepped inside with quiet certainty. "I'd want this," she said simply. "Not as payment. Not from fear or gratitude. Just because I choose to." Their coming together was gentle at first, his hands hesitant on her scared skin, her breath catching when old memories threatened to intrude. But patience gave way to hunger, tenderness to passion. They learned each other's bodies as they had learned each other's wounds, with care and growing wonder. Afterward, lying in the tangle of sheets, Nadia traced the lattice of scars across his chest. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," she murmured. Thorne was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I've been afraid my entire life. Not of dying, but of living without purpose." She pressed her lips to his shoulder. "And now I'm afraid of different things." His fingers wove through her hair. "Losing this, failing you, finding that vengeance was all we had." Nadia rose above him, her face solemn in the dim light. "Vengeance brought us together, but it isn't what kept me returning to your door at night. It isn't what made me follow you to Varric's compound. What did? The hope that someone who understood my darkness might also see whatever light remains." She placed his hand over her heart. "This is what I offer now, freely. Not broken, not as payment. Just mine to give." That night changed something fundamental between them. The walls they'd maintained, necessary during their campaign of retribution, began to fall. They spoke of before. His childhood on a frontier colony, her years studying at the Vasari Science Academy. They allowed themselves, cautiously, to speak of after. When Thorne woke alone the next morning, panic seized him until he found Nadia in the kitchen space, wearing his shirt, preparing traditional Vasari tea. I thought you'd left, he admitted. Not without saying goodbye. She handed him a steaming cup. And not without hearing your answer about Esper Corporation. About staying. Only if you'd consider staying too. Her smile was answer enough.
The message arrived 3 months after they'd settled on Talaris, a temperate colony world where Esper Corporation maintained its headquarters. Thorne returned from his security duties to find Nadia standing motionless in their apartment, staring at the holographic communication floating before her. "The Vizari High Council," she said without turning. "They've confirmed our suspicions. I am the last of my lineage." Thorne set down his gear, moving to stand beside her. The elegant script detailed what they'd pieced together over months of investigation. The Helix Brigade had specifically targeted Nadia's research vessel because her bloodline carried genetic markers valuable to their black market clients. Her entire extended family had been systematically hunted across the galaxy. "They're offering sanctuary," she continued, her voice carefully neutral, "and a position restoring cultural archives on the homeworld." Thorne's chest tightened, but he kept his expression even. "An honor worthy of your abilities." Their life together had taken shape with surprising ease. Nadia had found work in a xenobotanical laboratory, her expertise respected among her colleagues. Their apartment overlooked rolling hills where native grasses created waves of emerald and gold. At night, they no longer needed catastrophe to drive them to each other's arms. It was more than either had dared hope for after so much bloodshed. Yet Thorne had always known this moment might come, when her people called her back to a heritage he couldn't share. "When would you leave?" he asked, echoing the question from months before. Nadia turned to him, her eyes reflecting the sunset streaming through their windows. "I haven't accepted. It's your heritage, Nadia, your culture, a culture that taught pacifism while my family was slaughtered." Bitterness edged her voice. "A council that only found value in me once I became rare." Thorne took her hands. "Don't reject them because of what we did. The V